start. This is Allison Homestead. Thank you all for being here. It was so great to meet you all in Marysville yesterday, and thank you to all of our great speakers who came out, and I think we had a really good time yesterday. Today we're going to be finishing up our week on the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance with a post-webinar on community engagement. We have two speakers for you today to talk about how to engage with your community and developers and how to take a big picture when implementing this ordinance. So again, I'm Allison. I work here at the Local Government Commission as the Water Program Coordinator, and I'm joined here with Alyssa, who is also helping facilitate this webinar.
Hi everyone. Next slide.
So today's agenda, once again, we are reviewing the key points from yesterday just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Alyssa will be going over this. Then we're going to be looking at achieving landscape solutions, so how to bring in the community and have everyone see landscape or water efficient landscapes as a solution. And finally, Danielle Dolan will be talking about how to connect your community to the Model Water Efficient Landscape. We'll have some time for Q&A, and then there will be concluding remarks. Next slide. We will be sending out a follow-up survey. Look for that in your chat box, which is the lower option in your panel. Please fill out the surveys. Your feedback helps us make better trainings for you. And now Alyssa will just give us a quick review of what we learned yesterday, and then we'll take it from there.
Great. Thank you, Allison. Hi, everyone. Huge thank you again to all our speakers and attendees for coming to the workshop yesterday in Marysville. It was great to have all of you be a part of our opportunity to put the workshop and webinars together with the help and resources from Allison and Danielle here at LGC, or Local Government Commission. Also, thank you to Nashli and Danielle for speaking in today's webinar. Next slide. So I'm just going to go over briefly a few key points and takeaways from yesterday's workshop, since it was 4 hours jam-packed with information. However, we won't spend too much time on this for the interest of not being too redundant. Next slide. Oh, oops, actually go back, sorry. The previous slide. So the first couple things we took away from the workshop is that MWELO has a history of updates, and the birth of the MWELO came from AB 325/1990, Water Conservation and Landscaping Act, AB 2717/2004, which was Task Force, and AB 1881/2006, which was really the first round of updates for MWELO. And finally, last year we had the Executive Order B 2915, which was the second round of updates. So with all of these updates, we can clearly see that California is shifting to a more sustainable landscaping trend, and it is a good opportunity for adapting to California's climate and embracing dry summers. There are a number of reasons we should comply with the MWELO, as we saw yesterday, with a few just being that there are environmental, societal, and economic values in living landscapes. There are also a lot of stressors on water supply, many of which Julie went over yesterday, such as the fact that we are shifting to more permanent crops. We have higher presence of invasive species, more issues with water quality, and major population growth. Overall, we should also comply with the MWELO because MWELO has the potential to provide a lot of long-term solutions, such as fossil fuel reduction, urban shading and cooling, and wildlife habitat creation, just to name a couple. Next slide. Now I'll dive into a few key points for some of the factors that are part of landscaping that we went over yesterday. We learned that soils are very fragile and are easily ruined by a number of things, including over-fertilization and construction. But there are provisions in MWELO to improve soil conditions. We also learned that implementation of stormwater capture can provide a lot of benefits. When you have rain gardens, bioswales, and dry stream beds, you can improve local water quality, and it shortens the irrigation season. One of the biggest emphasis yesterday was on limiting turf and landscapes. As we heard from Julie, it should not be used as default ground cover, and if we do use it, we have to be smart about where we put it, or that it is also okay if we use it properly. Otherwise, turf has the biggest potential for water waste because it is the most water intensive. We should also be cognizant about putting turf in medians on roadways because it is dangerous. Next slide. And as you can see, this is a picture that Julie had in her presentation yesterday where turf here is okay because it has the potential to be used, and there is a created balance here between turf and other plants. Next slide. A couple more key points from yesterday's workshop was focusing in on updates to irrigation design plan as a part of landscaping. A theme here is that it is important to remember for deciding which kind of irrigation system you want or type of equipment you have. It really will depend on the type of soil and how fast your water moves through the soil. We noted some of the provisions that affect irrigation systems and soil holistically. Another key part of the ordinance is for irrigation efficiency, requiring all irrigation devices must meet the American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineer and International Code Council. Dodd went over many of the irrigation efficiencies of some of the equipment from Hunter Industries, and he touched on how automatic irrigation controllers will utilize either evapotranspiration or soil moisture sensor data that utilizes non-volatile memory, and this shall be required for irrigation scheduling in irrigation systems. Lastly, we touched on gray water, and it will encourage folks to implement a system that will provide another source for irrigation water as long as it complies with the California Plumbing Code. Although not required, we also saw there is a potential of achieving net zero homes with the implementation of gray water systems. Lastly, yesterday we went over the water budget, and I hope you all enjoyed the activity of working through your own calculation and were able to solve it. Next slide. A key point here to note for the water budget and the provisions were for ET adjustment factor, special landscape area, and irrigation efficiency. You can see all the numbers here that were in the update for the MWELO. Next slide. So lastly, yesterday we went over landscape plans, and by using the application package that was provided by the City of West Sacramento, we could go down a checklist for reading the plans. We know that there are many challenges faced with the MWELO with compliance, but a good strategy to overcome this is to develop the checklist. And also we learned some strategies from the pre-webinar that was on Tuesday. Next slide. So thank you again. Overall, a lot of content was covered yesterday, and one of the things that I've personally taken away from all of this is that there are a lot of details and hard work that go into the implementation of MWELO, but there are many resources to help, which Danielle and Noshli will touch on the rest of the webinar. Thanks again for coming yesterday.
All right, next up, we're going to have Noshli. Noshli is joining us from the Water Now Alliance, where she works as a program manager. We're excited with what she has to share with us today. I'm going to just grab her presentation real quick.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I've been working with the Local Government Commission for about the last year or so. The majority of our work with Local Government Commission has been to host qualified water efficient landscaper classes. We held one in November in Fresno. We held another one at the end of April in Fresno. And we'll be holding our gray water specialty module next week in the Fresno area. What QUEL teaches is water efficient and water wise landscape principles, irrigation audits, and we talk a lot about the available technologies that are out there on the market. So for Water Now Alliance, what we do, we are in an alliance of elected officials from Western states, and those states are Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and of course California. And our mission is to achieve high-impact, widespread adoption of sustainable water solutions in communities that are compatible with a healthy environment for the future. So how the LGC Local Government Commission and the QUEL work fits in is into this first bucket here, water conservation and water use efficiency. We find that it's really important to define what sustainable is. So this is our working definition, methods of providing water to urban areas without using up or destroying water resources and allowing them to remain usable for the future in a healthy condition. And so as an alliance, we focus on implementing these innovative strategies that help to accelerate adoption of reuse and efficiency technologies, green infrastructure, watershed health, stormwater recapture, and groundwater management. So I think it's really important that we ask at the forefront what it is we want from our customers and what we want to see change in our cities. What is the shift that we want to see? So I'm going to be talking about the new norm a lot, and what I mean by that is a shift from our current status quo of lots of green grass and turf, and we see that green grass in the medians, really high water use plants. So what we want is to shift that. So we want to inspire, educate, and empower our homeowners to take water efficient actions. Most importantly, I think, is to foster that long-term behavioral change and market transformation. So we really want this to be not a temporary fix because we're in a drought right now and the governor says we have to conserve, but actually changing the way people think about water, their relationship to water, and we'll talk about some strategies of how to instill those values in people. We're going to talk about some barriers to addressing water efficient landscapes. I think that one of the main barriers is simply a lack of knowledge. People really just aren't aware of how much water they use. They don't know where their water comes from. A study by the EPA shows that the average American family uses over 300 gallons of water per day at home. And in California, nearly half of residential use is on the outdoor landscapes. So customers really need tools, assistance, and resources to help them take advantage of existing conservation programs. If we want them to be signing up and partaking, they need to have support, which means we also need to be conducting robust outreach campaigns. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. When we're talking about turf specifically, your average citizen simply does not have a grasp on how much water it takes to keep grass green. We have a study from the Metropolitan Water District of over 11 million acres of turf conversion, and we saw that single-family homes saw a reduction of almost 19% off their total water use by replacing their lawns. And for parks, median, city property, offices, industrial sites, and homeowners associations, they saw savings of almost 24% off their total water use by replacing their lawns. So we're really seeing this shift away from green grass into these water-efficient landscapes. Attitudes are also a major barrier to adoption of water-wise and drought-efficient landscaping. I think it's pretty common that people think of drought-tolerant landscaping as boring, sparse, ugly, when in reality, there's a lot of natural beauty out there. It doesn't have to mean ugly or desert-like. There's a huge available palette of durable and attractive plants that thrive in California's climate. Another major barrier that comes along with this is that these landscapes take about a year or more to establish themselves. So during that first year, you have to be patient and play the long game, that these landscapes are going to fill themselves in and the colors will come. Another common misconception about drought-tolerant landscapes is that they aren't green enough. So we are seeing a lot of grass alternatives on the market, and these are a few examples of them. Another barrier to the adoption of water-wise landscaping is the cost. So depending on how affluent a particular community is, that will influence how we talk to them about water-efficient landscapes. So we know that the cost of water is rising everywhere. But for the more affluent communities, cost is going to be less of an incentivizer to change their habits. And for them, it's going to be more about these social pressures and competitions or wanting to show off their water-efficient landscapes. And with the more of the lower income, less affluent communities, these rebates are going to be a major incentive, other financial incentives. But no matter what your barrier is, education and outreach is always going to be an important part of helping to make this the new norm. So we think it's important to pick an approach or more than one. So establishing a regional perspective. In a study in 2011, 77% of Americans were unable to correctly identify their source of drinking water. And as far as they can tell, their water comes from the tap. So informing citizens about where their water comes from, how much energy it takes to treat and transport that water, gives them a connection to that water supply and changes their habits. And we've seen this time and again that education changes how people feel about water and it changes their usage habits. So that's that long-term behavioral looking to influence. We also want to set the stage for why water efficiency is important. So this is an approach you can take to your educational outreach efforts. Efficiency is important because we're in a long-term drought, because climate change is making water resources less available. There's many reasons why water efficiency is important. Another effective method is to share what other people are doing. So this comes back to those social pressures. We want to show our citizens that this is cool, this is normal, this makes sense, and this is beautiful. So sharing what others are doing can be a really powerful tool. And we also want to be making it really easy for people to adopt these water efficient landscapes. So we want to provide simple ways that homeowners can do their parts. We want to motivate them to take action, whether small or large. And part of that will be sharing trends, ideas, examples, tips, and resources. And there are a ton of examples of really quality resources out there, whether it's plant lists or design guidelines to help citizens decide what's going to look best for them and what they like, and then make it easier for them to pursue installation of a water-wise landscape. We're going to talk a little bit about how to work with developers and community members to help influence the widespread adoption of water-wise landscapes. And this is that new norm that I've been talking about. So this is what MWELO aims to inspire, or rather it dictates, is limited turf to functional areas or maximum percentage of the landscape areas. We want to maximize infiltration and minimize, or really we want to eliminate runoff. Low impact development, or LID concepts, capture rainfall for beneficial use. We're looking at the native plantings. Mulch is really important, and mulch helps to limit evaporation and water loss. So it keeps that water in the soil available for plants to use. It dries out less quickly, and then the landscape itself requires less water overall to keep it healthy and thriving. This is a CUWCC, that's the California Urban Water Conservation Council diagram on this new norm. So this will be different for different communities, but I think this is a really great starting point. So if we're looking over there on the left at the stewardship side, what we're trying to instill in people is that efficiency ethic, that environmental awareness. We want them to strive for minimal impact, and we want our citizens to feel like they can be leaders in the community and help to inspire others by demonstrating their own water-wise landscapes. And then what we're looking to achieve there is this resource efficiency and protection of our natural resources. And from there, we get our market transformation, and we get our improved quality of life. And Danielle will be talking more about that at the end of this webinar. Quality of life, that social well-being, sustainability, personal health, and wildlife habitat. And these are the more intangible benefits we get from creating native landscapes and living with them. There's a lot of resources out there to help with all of the things we talked about. Local government commission especially, their entire goal is to meet the needs of communities like yours, and they can and will provide additional resources. So please do reach out to the local government commission and talk about future trainings and workshops, and tell them what you need, and they'll help your community become more water strong. So they're looking to create all across California as water strong communities. Sustainable sites is similar to the LEED program for buildings, which gives them a grade based on how efficient and green they are. So sustainable sites is the outdoor version of that. Water smart landscapes. Water smart is the federal government's qualifying standards for water efficiency. QUEL, I talked about that very briefly at the beginning. Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper. It teaches the water audits and sustainable landscape design, and that's an EPA Water Sense program as well. The CLCA, the California Landscape Contractors Association, has a certified water manager course. We'll hear a little bit more about that later on as well. And then my organization, Water Now Alliance, we're here to be a resource for you as well. My contact info was on that first slide. And you'll have plenty of time to ask me questions at the end if you so desire. It's really important to get your community involved, and there are a lot of approaches to making this happen. We all know that social media is out there, and you should use them. That's how people get their information these days. Social media, your website should be regularly updated. Community meetings and workshops are important, and flyers and posters. So having these out in the community, we'll talk about a few different places that you can get the most visibility with these. Drought shaming, this is an example of the social pressures we talked about, but we don't feel this should be promoted by the municipality. Our messages should be positive and encouraging. We're trying to make this the new norm. We're not trying to take a negative approach to encouraging people to adopt water-wise landscaping. And most communities, including yours, have fines and penalties for water waste and overwatering. So those serve that purpose. So drought shaming shouldn't be a municipal activity. And this is not the norm. This is what we're moving away from. Some strategies for communicating compliance. Awards and recognition programs are very valuable. People like to be rewarded for their hard work, and they also like to show off when they've put money and time into a new landscape. They would like to get recognized for that. So award and recognition programs, there are literally hundreds of examples of these programs across California, and I would be happy to share more of them with you. But typically they are online submissions with a judging panel. Might be a couple of city council members, someone from the water conservation staff, could be a local nonprofit is involved. But people submit their gardens, the before and after photos, and then there's a winner. I think yard signs for in progress and completed projects is also a great way to show off these new gardens. So it's showing that it's an upgrade. We're not compromising, we're not giving up our grass, but we're upgrading our landscapes to these sustainable, native, beautiful and colorful landscapes. Having literature at your permitting offices is important. That's where your contractors, so your market influences, are going to be taking place, and you want to have materials available for them to grab on their way in and out, especially if that's a place where they're coming often to get permits for projects. Demonstration gardens and garden tours, you can host these every couple of months, and another way to get both citizens and your municipal staff involved. Drought clinics have been very popular all across California, teaching people about this new norm. When talking about engaging your stakeholders, the most important group to engage at the forefront is your internal staff. It's really important that you have a unified message so that when customers are calling or when your team is out in the field doing water audits or talking to people about water efficient landscapes, it's really important to have a consistent message. So bringing all of these are just a few examples, but bringing everyone into the meeting and letting them know what the official stance is, what the policy is, and really having that unified front is very important. If you can't get your staff on board, then it's going to be really hard to get your community members on board. You want to provide lots of tools and resources. So these are all screenshots that I pulled offline. We had this one down here, the Show the Region That Using Less Water Can Be Beautiful, is an inspiration book, and it was user created essentially. People were allowed to submit their photos for inclusion in the showcase. Water Smart is lifestyle friendly, so showing people with functional turf mixed in with their water efficient landscapers. Up here on the right, you see a contest winner. So these tools and resources, plant guides and seasonal guides, are going to help to increase the participation and the adoption of water-wise landscaping. Also very important to get your developers on board, get the industry involved. These partnerships are going to be key for making water-wise landscapes the norm. You're going to want to ask for their advice, help them create content, allow them to have an input on what the expert review looks like, and ask for their help with marketing assistance. If you're able to get buy-in from the developer, builder, landscaper community, your program overall is going to be much more successful. This is another diagram from the CUWCC. And so you can see here we have MWELO on the left. This is our policy and regs. And it's going to help influence industry, but what you really need is it going both ways. In order to get over to the far right with the behavior modification, we need the industry involved. We need the contractors pushing for water-wise landscapes. This should be a selling point for new home construction. As water bills, the cost of water is going up, these will become more and more attractive. So now's a really good time to get your landscapers on board and your contractors. We're going to talk a little bit about outdoor landscape water efficiency and what the potential is for savings there. So in California, about half of residential use is outdoors. And we know that as much as 50% of the water we use outdoors is wasted from inefficient watering methods. That right there shows us how much water we can be saving just with technology upgrades, with efficiency measures, and this is beyond even replacing turf for the water-wise landscaping. So looking at your average turf yard, this house on the left uses about 30,000 gallons of water per year on their turf, and replacing that with a water-wise California native landscape, they're going to be at about 11,500 gallons of water. So almost a third as much water being used on the water efficient and the native landscaping versus that turf heavy yard. And we know that the person who spends the most time on the yard is the guy who's cutting it. Residential outdoor water use in the U.S. total accounts for more than 9 billion gallons of water each day. And we estimate that 50% nationwide is wasted. These irrigation control technologies can significantly reduce overwatering by applying water only when plants need it. You guys heard Alyssa talk a little bit about some smart controllers earlier, and those have the ability to save 30–40% of wasted water just by installing them in the first place. In a study by the EPA, replacing a standard clock timer with a water sense labeled irrigation controller can save an average home nearly 8,800 gallons of water annually. And it's been estimated that if every home in the United States with an automatic sprinkler system installed and properly operated a water sense labeled controller, we could save $435 million in water costs and 120 billion gallons of water nationally. And this is just preventing overwatering from lawns and landscapes. And that's equal to about the annual household water needs of nearly 1.3 million American homes. There is so much technology coming out these days that can help make us more efficient in our outdoor watering needs. Smart controllers, mainly. We see in companies like WaterSmart software. So that would be a utility-side software, and they are constantly monitoring water use, and they're able to detect leaks almost instantaneously. And it comes back to that knowledge and information. When you empower your citizens with knowledge about their water use, then they change them. So something like WaterSmart technology, someone's going to be aware of how much they use, how much water it takes to run the dishwasher or flush their toilet. And pretty quickly after beginning to use the software, we see a significant decline in water usage, which is pretty incredible. Smart controllers, we have weather-based controllers, ET. We also have historic weather-based controllers, which are basing the watering needs of your landscape on historical weather trends. These are nearly obsolete at this point because we've seen that we can't trust the historical data anymore. But there are weather-based that are usually hooked up to your Wi-Fi, and they are taking real-time weather data and adjusting accordingly. And they'll also take into account watering restrictions, certain days on different sides of the street. It really takes a lot of the user error out of landscape efficiency and outdoor watering. We also talked a little bit about gray water earlier, and we'll be hosting a class next week in Fresno, the Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper Gray Water Specialty Module. And I think you guys already know, but gray water is the water from your washing machine, your showers, and your bathroom sinks when used to water your outdoor landscaping. According to MWELO, gray water is exempt from watering restrictions, and almost every city in California also exempts gray water watering from the watering restrictions. So you could be watering your yard every day with your gray water, regardless of those restrictions. The economic benefits of installing water-efficient landscapes: use less, pay less. We know that the cost of water is rising, especially in comparison to other utilities. And so right now, the cost justification might not be too strong. The rate of return on your investment might take a couple years, but within the next couple years, as the cost of water continues to rise, we'll see that these landscapes are a lot more cost-effective. Majority of cities in California have also upped their fines for overwatering and for runoff, so you can see savings there. And overall, these water-efficient landscapers require less maintenance in the long run. They might take a year or two to establish themselves, but you won't need that regular lawn service. And generally, if you're doing it right, you won't need to be spraying pesticides and chemicals onto the landscape, because the plants work together to prevent pests. That's called integrated pest management. So we're looking at less maintenance and less cost in the long run. When we talk about water savings, we're also talking about energy savings. Treating and pumping water consumes about 20% of California's energy use, and that's a significant amount of our energy. The Clean Power Plan is federal legislation, requires us to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions by 32% by 2030. And if we're using 20% of our energy for pumping and treating water, reducing that use can result in some significant CO2 reductions. So we'll be seeing more comprehensive legislation coming out from the state level in the next few months that will give guidance to water utilities on how to save that water and how they can bank those credits towards the Clean Power Plan. And that is it for me. I am available to ask for questions at the end of the webinar, and I hope you have lots of them.
Next up, we have Danielle Dolan from the Local Government Commission. She'll be talking about sort of the big picture of how the MWELO fits into all ecological and environmental efforts and how it can fit into your land use planning efforts. All right. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you, Allison. I'm really glad to have everybody on the line today. I heard that yesterday's in-person training went wonderful. I wish I could have been there to meet all of you. I think that the content that's been provided has been really useful to everyone, and hopefully will make it easier for you to implement your water efficient landscape ordinance. So as Allison said, I just want to bring this back to the big picture, kind of zoom out to the 50,000 feet level and see how the water efficient landscape ordinance fits into other statewide priorities and other land use planning efforts, both locally and across the state, as well as provide you some resources to help you implement these programs and maybe bring in some more funding into your local municipalities. So two main topics. First, I'm going to talk about the co-benefits of water efficient landscapes, and then some of the resources that are available. So the major co-benefits of water efficient landscapes include reducing the urban heat island effect and improving urban greening, improving stormwater quality, and providing living landscape ecosystems. So as we are encountering some significant changes in our local climate and our global climate, we're seeing higher temperatures, especially during the summer months. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of an urban heat island effect. The more hardscape we have, the more pavement, we absorb high levels of solar radiation, which cause significant air quality issues and contribute to global warming. Whereas the more greenscape you have, the more living plant matter that you have in your region, that's going to help reflect that solar radiation and also to help contain moisture within the ecosystem. And maintaining and protecting your native plants can bring down those urban temperatures. This will also help from a public health perspective in reducing the number of heat stress illnesses in the summer months. The California Urban Forestry Council, or CUFAC, has a certified urban forester program, and they provide trainings that will help you implement some of the concepts of urban greening or urban forestry, and can even help you find resources to provide free plants. So when you're working through implementing your water efficient landscape ordinance, you can direct your contractors to those resources as well. Stormwater quality, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the changes in statewide stormwater permitting regulations. In 2014, the new MS4 guidelines went into effect, which include much stricter regulations on stormwater quality and require green infrastructure or low impact development. And that is using plant matter to help treat stormwater before it enters our waterways. The three key principles of low impact development are slow it, spread it, and sink it. So slowing water down so that it can be absorbed into the landscape and not collect as many pollutants in the process, as well as settling some of those pollutants out of the stormwater flows. Spreading that stormwater out over a larger porous surface to minimize runoff and allow the soil to filter out pollutants, and then sinking that water into the groundwater And this also ties into the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which we won't go into too much detail on, but just bear in mind that the more we can absorb our stormwater and our rainwater into our landscape, the better that is for our overall water security and improving our groundwater levels. So if we ensure our landscapes are water efficient and also incorporating stormwater quality benefits, then that will have an ancillary benefit of improving our groundwater quality and quantity. And these principles can be incorporated into public right-of-ways, medians, roadside ditches, street front landscaping, parking lots, as well as new developments that are going in with residential and institutional developments. And then the many benefits of living landscapes as ecosystems. Having native plants, or at least California adapted plants, helps support biodiversity. Native shrubs and trees provide habitat for both birds and insects, as well as small mammals and worms, which all help keep our soil healthy and also help pollinate our other plants that we use for food, either people that are growing food at home or keeping pollinator levels up so that they can maintain the agricultural economy as well if you have a local ag economy. And similarly, as we discussed the urban heat island effect, having living landscapes reduces localized heating, especially having trees and large shrubs to shade. And this also improves air quality. Trees and shrubs capture dust and smoke as well as other pollutants, and they help produce additional oxygen. So these are all important concepts to keep in mind when you're implementing the water efficient landscape ordinance, not to just think of it as a compliance piece, but the other benefits that it can provide to your community. Some of the public health benefits include water quality, as we mentioned, with stormwater runoff, improving the water quality that's entering our waterways, and also if you're going to be capturing stormwater as a water supply, it will filter out a lot of those pollutants in the process. And updating your irrigation system will reduce the amount of spray and other contaminants that might end up in the air. As I said before, trees trap particles and pollutants, and shrubs and grass can cover bare soils so that we don't have as much dust particles in the air. And of course, by grass, we're referring to native grasses or other drought-tolerant, low water use grasses. And then as far as a community development benefit, more heavily landscaped but appropriately landscaped for California climate areas tend to bring in additional economic revenue into commercial areas. Areas that are well landscaped and shaded tend to keep shoppers shopping longer and keep them in a better mood, so they're willing to buy more. So you can definitely bring in more tax revenue in your commercial areas. It also just makes people happy. So now we'll talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available to you. As far as supplies, either if you're implementing your own water efficient landscape or want to direct your contractors to supplies that they can get to incorporate these principles, you can get free and discounted supplies or other incentives from different community-based organizations. The state provides Save Our Water rebates for water efficient irrigation systems, as well as other appliances that aren't necessarily relevant to water efficient landscaping. But you can definitely cover those irrigation systems. Many cities provide free mulch from their green waste program. And the Sacramento Tree Foundation and other local tree foundation organizations can provide free trees as well. And you'll be provided a copy of all of these slides after the webinar, which include the links to where you can get more information about these different programs. Also, we encourage you to consider building partnerships with other departments and other programs in your area, or building partnerships with local landscapers or nurseries to provide incentives for using more drought-tolerant landscaping. There are also many places you can look for technical assistance. The Department of Water Resources not only provides a wealth of information on their website and many fact sheets and brochures to help guide you both in implementing the water efficient landscape ordinance, but other drought-tolerant landscaping initiatives and priorities. But they also provide technical assistance. They can send staff out in some instances to provide training locally on site and provide sample forms to train you on how to implement your local WELO. The California Urban Forestry Council provides trainings and educational resources as well, specifically on landscape design and tree care. And the UC Ag and Environmental Resources Extension Office has a Master Gardeners program. That's a great resource to tap into. You can get drought gardening tips and demonstration gardens, and sometimes you can even get some Master Gardener volunteers to help out on implementation projects. Now let's talk a little bit about the money. How do you actually pay for implementing either drought-tolerant landscaping programs in general or your WELO program specifically? I know many local municipalities struggle with bringing in enough revenue to maintain the staffing levels that you need in order to go out and check for compliance on all of your applicants and finding additional funding just to keep your programs running. So we have a few ideas and resources for you, as well as a number of other programs that are out there for your residents as well as your contractors. So of course you can hire a consultant and pay fee for service, either to go out and do your plan checks or to even write grants for you to bring revenue into your department. And as I mentioned, there are technical assistance services out there that can help drive down costs. But one relevant source that's available to everyone right now is Proposition 1, or the California Water Bond that was passed in the end of 2014. The water bond includes landscape rebates and CalConserve Revolving Fund. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in just a minute. Also, I want to share with you a new opportunity called Enhanced Infrastructure Financing Districts, and I'll go into quite a bit of detail on what those are and how you can form one. And then talking a little bit about your existing revenue sources and how you can use your existing budget to augment some of these efforts. And then a little bit about state loans and other grant programs as well as federal loans and grants. So let's talk about Proposition 1, or the water bond. The most relevant section of the bond for WELO implementation is Chapter 7, the Regional Water Security, Climate, and Drought Preparedness Program. There was $810 million allocated to this program alone. Only $288 million of that has been committed through existing grant programs. And so there's $521 million remaining that is still to be allocated in future years and through other programs. So much of that funding has been contributed towards the turf replacement rebate program, which provides monetary incentives for replacing your landscape, your irrigation systems, and your landscape plant matter. And this can cover up to $2 a square foot for your customers. There's $24 million in the program budget as a whole. And each home can receive one rebate. So this is definitely a resource you want to provide to your existing residents, as well as contractors that are putting in new developments. This may be an opportunity for them. And then the CalConserve Revolving Fund is intended to be a sustainable funding source for water use efficiency projects. This isn't grant money, it is a loan that has to be paid back, but the fund provides measurable reductions in urban per capita potable water use by covering water efficiency upgrades at no upfront cost to residents, as well as low interest loans to local agencies to finance on-site improvements and to repair, replace cracked or leaking water pipes. So this can cover your irrigation systems on-site within your agency. Cities, counties, municipal utility districts, and community service districts can all apply, as well as sanitation districts and water districts and public water systems, as well as private water companies under a PUC. Next, I'd like to tell you a little bit about enhanced infrastructure financing districts. This is new legislation that was just passed at the end of 2015. It's similar to infrastructure financing districts, or IFDs, which you may be familiar with, but this is intended to be a replacement for the lost community redevelopment funds. And SB 628 was passed to enable cities or counties to form these enhanced infrastructure financing districts, basically forming a coalition with other agencies in the area, drawing a boundary around a certain region that you want to invest in for a specific purpose, and then you can collect tax increment revenues to invest in that area as well as recruit private investment. And this can be used to cover new construction, to rehabilitate existing areas, or for utility-related infrastructure. So some of the benefits of enhanced infrastructure financing districts is what they can be used for. These include sewage treatment, water reclamation, facilities to collect and treat water for urban uses, flood control levees and dams, parks and rec facilities, open space, and any projects that implement a sustainable community strategy. So the range of possibilities is pretty much wide open on what you can use EIFDs for. The only things they cannot be used for is to cover the cost of routine operations and maintenance, and they cannot be used for schools or school districts. So what makes the EIFDs so enticing is that you only need a 55% voter approval to establish an EIFD. This is much lower than the Prop 218 threshold of a 3/4 vote, and no public vote is required for projects. So once you have the EIFD approved with your public vote, then to actually approve projects, you don't need a public vote. If you're going to levy tax increment bonds, then you do need a public vote, but again, that's only 55% majority to get that passed. And these funds can be used for very large projects that it's often hard to generate the revenue to cover. When you're using tax increment funding, there's a multiplier effect for bringing in future tax revenue. If you're investing in a new area and bringing in outside investors, then the tax level is going to rise over time and then continue feeding into this fund. It also provides expanded financial authority in how you manage those funds, and it's much more flexible than other institutional collaboration programs. Some of the limitations are you need a reserve of funding in order to provide the bond issuance, and there's limited ability to repay short-term debt service, so you do have to have some other revenue streams in order to cover those costs. The formation process can be very lengthy and costly up front, but again, the benefit is that these costs will be paid back over time. And in order for EIFDs to really succeed, you need both the city and the county to collaborate on the process. And then because of Prop 218 and Prop 26, you do have to establish that proportionality nexus between whoever's paying the tax increment and who's benefiting from those investments. The California Economic Summit has developed resources to help guide municipalities in forming EIFDs, and they have limited it down to 3 easy steps, which I find comical because yes, it's 3 easy steps, but each one of those steps is quite cumbersome. So the first step is identifying what needs to be done. So what are your desired outcomes or projects? Step 2 is locating your available funding streams, whether it's assessment revenues, free revenues, or public debt. All 3 of those are really easy to come by, right? And then step 3 is establishing the link between the payer and the beneficiary, which if anyone that's gone through the Prop 218 process knows that's no easy task. We do have some other resources available to you to learn more about EIFDs. The Local Government Commission recently released a guide to smart growth money, or new funding strategies for community improvements, and this includes some case study examples on the enhanced infrastructure financing districts. Also, the California Economic Summit's how-to guide, the link is included here as well. And the League of California Cities conducted a bill analysis on the legislation when it was passed. So later on, when you receive the copies of these slides, you can check those links out and learn more about EIFDs. Our funding guide also covers 12 different funding strategies to enhance infrastructure financing districts and guidelines for utilizing each of those different strategies, as well as case studies for each of them. Now, because EIFDs are so new, we don't have any completed case studies. We have one example with the city of West Sacramento. They formed an infrastructure financing district, an IFD, for their bridge district. And because that was so effective, they are now in the process of pursuing an enhanced infrastructure financing district. But as EIFDs become more common, we will be producing additional case studies and sharing that information with our network. And at the end of the webinar, I could try to answer questions on EIFDs. I'm not an expert, but I'll do my best. And at the very least, I can direct you to other people who are well-versed in it that can answer those questions. So I do want to move on to some of the state and federal programs that are available. Pictured here is a brochure from the Department of Water Resources that is specific to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, but many of the funding resources that are outlined in that brochure are relevant to water efficient landscaping and other efforts that you may want to pursue. Some of the resources I want to highlight include the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or the California Climate Investments, the Strategic Growth Council Sustainable Community Strategies, and state infrastructure loans through the CalConserve Revolving Fund 2015 loan program, and now we're in the 2016 loan program. Pretty soon they'll have the guidelines for the 2017 program. And then federal grants and loans as well. So the California Strategic Growth Council's Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, or ASHSC, awards funds through a competitive application process for land use, housing, transportation, and land preservation projects to support infill and compact development that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So this would include water efficient landscape efforts. And this is funded by state cap and trade emissions auction proceeds. So this is a source of revenue that's going to continue to grow and be readily available every year. So you definitely want to check out the Sustainable Community Strategies, Affordable Housing, and Sustainable Communities Program to learn more about those funds. Also, Community Land Trusts, or CLTs, are nonprofit organizations that acquire ownership of land to build assets for the community, including affordable housing, commercial districts, parks and open space, and commercial infrastructure improvement areas. So CLTs earn funding from various sources of public and private capital, but tend to rely on grants, federal programs, and donations. CLTs provide funding and support for many different types of community projects. Their primary focus has been on long-term housing affordability in low-income communities, but they are expanding to include other efforts. And then tax credits. Tax credits produce capital for qualified projects and thereby reduce the amount of development costs that's needed to be funded through debt or other sources. Project sponsors sell credits to investors who benefit by using them to directly lower the amount of tax they owe. Some common types of tax credits you may be familiar with are geared toward encouraging new markets, low-income housing, and historic preservation. But it's also possible to apply different categories of tax credits to fund projects. For example, a project sponsor could make use of a historic preservation and low-income housing tax credit in the same project. And then the last program I want to share with you is the Community Revitalization Investment Authority. Same slide. CRIAs have recently been enabled to fund certain projects through bonds issued by the use of tax increment financing, so very similar to enhanced infrastructure financing districts. This went into effect in the end of 2015, and it allows specific disadvantaged areas of California to create a CRIA, which would use property taxes and other available funding to improve infrastructure, expand job opportunities, reduce crime, clean up hazardous waste sites, and promote affordable housing. So that's it on funding for now. I'd like to move on to some of the staffing, training, and resources we have available.
Oh, you went backwards.
Sorry. Technical difficulties. I'm going the wrong way on the presentation. So I heard some feedback from the in-person workshop yesterday that one of the struggles that you're dealing with on the ground is that your staff aren't adequately trained in doing the plan inspections and improving plans to ensure they're compliant with the WELO. So there are staff training programs available, especially if your staff have to wear multiple hats. There are some training options, water auditing and landscaper training programs, either through the Certified Water Management Program, the Certified Landscape Irrigation Auditor, and Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper, which is offered by the US EPA. We're actually hosting a Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper program currently down in Fresno County, if anybody's willing to travel down that way. It's a heavily subsidized training. The base QWEL, Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper training, is a 20-hour course split over 3 days, and the cost is only about $50. And then you become a US EPA certified Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper. And then we also have an add-on course, the QWEL Gray Water course, which is an additional 16 hours of training time, split again over 3 days, where you actually learn the entire process, start to finish, of designing, permitting, and installing a gray water system. And I know Noshli spoke a little bit earlier about the QWEL Gray Water training. So you can find out more about these trainings on LGC's website if you're interested in getting certified. There are also professional concentrations from UC Extension in both water resources and environmental management and compliance. And a more non-traditional approach would be to hire interns or college students to train them in plan inspection and approval and send them out into the field for a landscape review. I know it can sound daunting to take on interns. If you don't have the staff now to do the work, how are you going to train and supervise interns? And can you really trust college students to do the work? Well, the Local Government Commission has an opportunity available for you. Just as one example, we're launching Water Corps this fall, which is a sister program to our Civic Spark AmeriCorps program. Both of these efforts are Governor's Initiative AmeriCorps programs. So we provide all of the oversight, training, recruitment, hiring, onboarding, and supervision for highly qualified, well-vetted, either recent college grads or folks that have been out of college for a while and have some experience but want to provide some community service. So both the Civic Spark program and Water Corps are capacity building programs. So we place fellows in your offices on the ground for whatever your specified project is, and we take care of all the oversight and all the headache, if you will, and you can train them in whatever it is you need them to accomplish, and then they'll also help to build capacity on site. And once they learn specialized training, they can teach other staff how to conduct whatever it is that they're gaining through their project knowledge. So if, for instance, you wanted to have fellows trained in plan review and compliance, then they could go out and actually run all the plan checks for you and then even build a more expansive internship program and train other volunteers to stay on board with the municipality after their service year ends. So both Civic Spark and Water Corps run on an 11-month service year, They begin their service in October. It runs October to September. And there's a very low-cost program because it's subsidized 50% by the AmeriCorps National Program. So you get 2 fellows for 11 months full-time at $37,000 a year for the Water Corps program specifically. The Civic Spark program is a little bit different. You can split up the number of hours that you would like a fellow for or the number of fellows that you have. And the Civic Spark program is designed more for climate change adaptation and mitigation projects, where Water Corps, as its name implies, is specific for water sustainability projects. So if you're interested in this program, you can apply on our website. The process is, there's a 4-step process. You submit your initial project application online, and we'll provide a link to that application. It basically just outlines what the service is that you're looking for and why you need assistance. And then we will review your application and do a follow-up call with you and work through a service agreement. Once the service agreement is signed, we'll conduct a pre-service capacity survey to figure out specifically what are the goals of the project and what are the tasks that the Water Corps fellow will be working on. And then once the Water Corps fellows are hired and placed, we'll do a fellow and site supervisor will work together with our project partners to outline the specific needs or the project scope of work. In order to be eligible to host Water Corps fellows, you have to meet a few criteria, although we've set the bar pretty low so that basically anyone in the state would apply, because we want to provide this service to as many folks as possible. If you meet any one of these 4 criteria by having the absence of one of these items, then you qualify. So if you do not have a dedicated staff person responsible for cross-sector and interjurisdictional collaboration or coordination on water and land use, then you're eligible. I know of very few municipalities who actually have a person on staff dedicated to those tasks. So that's the broadest category of eligibility. If you do not have a member of an integrated regional water management plan, you are eligible. If you're not actively participating in the formation of a groundwater sustainability agency or the development of a groundwater sustainability plan, you are eligible for Water Corps service. And if your agency is not, if you feel you're not currently equipped to meet all of your data, research, planning, engagement, or coordination needs to adequately meet local water sustainability goals and state water management priorities. So again, that's a pretty low bar. I think most folks would agree that they don't have all the staff and are fully equipped to meet all of their current needs. So again, the goal is to make sure everyone qualifies to receive support, so that if you're interested, you will qualify and we can get you set up with some Water Corps fellows to help meet those needs. So a little bit on the timeline for Water Corps. The application for projects is open now on our website. The priority application deadline is July 1st. And then between July 1st and October 1st, we are hoping to get all of those service agreements signed. And then early October is when all of our fellows will be hired and participate in their 2-week orientation. And then mid-October is when they'll actually start providing service on those projects. So I do indeed hope that you all, as soon as you get off the webinar, go online and check out the Water Corps program and sign up for some assistance. And then also, of course, go through and look through the other resources that we provided. But your initial next step after the webinar ends is to conduct the follow-up survey. We'll send you a link. It looks like the link is live now in the chat box. So please wait till after our Q&A session before signing off and participating in the survey. But we really do want to hear back from you on how the format of this workshop worked, if you're interested in other trainings, and what else we can do to better serve you and meet your needs. And then again, if you want to apply for the Water Corps program, go ahead and log on to the website and fill out your application, or feel free to give me a call and we can discuss different project options. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Allison, and we can probably move into our Q&A session.
Well, thank you, Danielle and Noshli. I think we have a couple of questions for you if you're open to answering. See that the first question is, what were those turf alternatives shown earlier? Maybe Noshli, you can talk a little about what turf alternatives are available.
Sure. So I showed a picture earlier of some green turf alternatives, and they actually do look a lot like turf. Some of those, I had a CROPI, which was a UC Davis study of over 20 kinds of turf alternatives. This was the most grass-like and the most water efficient. I also showed, I think, some silver carpet and also some myoporum. And I could follow up with those if anyone, whoever asked the question, is interested in receiving more information.
Allison, can we go back to Noshli's presentation and show those slides again?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it. Oh, whoops, that's the wrong one. Okay, let's see. All right. Yeah. This one? Wow. Okay. So do you want to talk a bit about the different...
The one that's closest there in the foreground, that's the CROPI. And that's the one that was rated really high on that UC Davis study. On your right, silver carpet, it's aptly named. It does have kind of a silver hue to it. And then over on the left, on the bank of that sidewalk, that's the myoporum. So as far as achieving that green look in the urban environment, these low-growing ground covers are really effective.
I'll just share another resource that we recently became aware of is UC Verde buffalo grass, which is a tall-ish growing, a longer grass, and it's a summer or hot weather turf grass alternative. So it does stay green in the summer and then goes into its dormancy in the winter months instead. So where most homeowners are trying to keep their lawn green in the summer because that's when they're naturally dormant, and they're spending so much water on their lawn to keep it green and then letting it die in the winter, or it just stays green in the winter. The UC Verde buffalo grass, I think, uses like 75% less water than traditional turf, and it does stay green in the summer, but it will go into its yellow phase dormancy in the winter months.
Okay, well, thank you. And maybe we can give you some of these resources. We'll send it out in a follow-up email now that this webinar and week of MWELO is wrapping up.
I'm not sure if we've talked about this, but a great plant resource is available online, and this is actually endorsed by the Department of Water Resources, and it's called WUCOLS, W-U-C-O-L-S, and what that stands for is Water Use Classification of Landscape Species, and you can search by type, so it could be ground cover or it could be shrubs or trees, and you can search by water usage, so ultra low, low, medium, or high. And that's a great resource. You can do active selection of plants and put them into your, if you're designing a landscape, you could be choosing them there. It's an interactive document online.
Great, and we actually did go over that a little bit yesterday during Dawn's presentation, Julie's presentation, but it's a good reminder. Thank you. Okay, so we have a second question. Either of you can take this question. So the second question is, what do community meeting and workshops look like? What do you teach?
I'll take that one. When we're talking about community meetings, it's really about engaging and educating your citizens. So generally you would start off with an overview of what a water efficient landscape is. I think it's usually safest to start under the assumption that These homeowners are there to learn because they don't know anything about water efficient landscapes. So start by talking about how much water turf uses, and other high water use plants like willows, and then teach them about different plant types, how soil affects plantings. We would go into the heat island effect is something that people seem to respond to because everyone's experienced it, even if they didn't know or haven't put a name on it, such as the heat island effect. So teaching them strategies for lessening their water usage, both outdoors and indoors. It's really important, and it's a great opportunity to let them know about available resources. So whether it's state rebates or if you have local rebates, if your city does water audits, this is a great time to let people know about those. And what you're doing is essentially you're creating water ambassadors. You're teaching your citizens how to be water-wise, and then they're going to go home and they're going to tell their families. So it's really important to send them home with resources, whether it's plant guides or printed materials, or even online resources they can seek out following the class. So oftentimes we'll teach from start to finish how to take a turf-heavy landscape and turn it into these water-wise native landscapes that we are promoting. And that would be pretty much what a community meeting looks like. Allison, was that the whole question?
Yeah, I think so. I think you covered what you would teach and what a workshop would look like.
Yeah. So you can do these actually really affordably. Oftentimes you can get local community members. The Master Gardeners Associations we talked about as being a resource are often willing to come and volunteer their time to host these classes. You can use a community center, which won't cost any money. You may have to pay some staff overtime, but generally you can keep these workshops really low cost. And these are also a great opportunity to engage the business community and to engage developers and others who perhaps want to donate plants or resources or time, even space, to holding and hosting these community workshops.
Okay, so we have a couple other questions that have come up. Let me just bring this back to full screen. Okay. So a third question, maybe for you, Danielle. What other types of programs can be funded by Prop 1 money?
Well, that's a really broad question. I don't think I have a great answer for it. Prop 1 has 9 or 10 different chapters. Each of those chapters covers a different state priority. It's pretty closely aligned with the Governor's California Water Action Plan, if you're familiar with that document. Prop 1 was really designed to be the seed funding to implement the Water Action Plan. So the 10 chapters of the legislation follow the 10 priorities of the Water Action Plan. There's a chapter on Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and funding to help implement that legislation. There's funding for the Integrated Regional Water Management Program, both for planning and implementation projects. Right now, they're in the first round of the Disadvantaged Communities Involvement Grant funding. So each of the 12 funding areas across the state, those are the IRWM funding areas, have been allocated a certain dollar amount, and all of the regional water management groups within that funding area are required to coordinate efforts and propose a joint shared proposal to the state for these non-competitive funds, specifically to investigate how to better engage disadvantaged communities in their area. And then they'll also be launching the implementation project funding dollars, and those can cover any project that's already adopted into your regional water management plan. And that can be anything from, fish passage to water quality in streams to educating the community about water conservation, stormwater, water treatment, water capture, water recycling, gray water. So it covers the gamut as long as it's in your IRWMP, your Integrated Regional Water Management Plan. There's also funding in there for water storage, both surface water storage and groundwater storage. That funding is being doled out through the California Water Commission. So if you're looking to fund either a surface water storage, a new reservoir or an off-stream reservoir, or to develop a groundwater storage program, there's monies available through the California Water Commission for those efforts. I believe I talked a little bit about the environmental restoration funding that's available. That's being administered mostly through the Natural Resources Agency and California Fish and Wildlife. That's all the ones off the top of my head. I think Noshli has a couple others.
I think this just helps to bring us back to the green infrastructure we're talking about, so the stormwater grant program. If you are doing stormwater improvements, and this program is intended to promote the beneficial use of stormwater and dry weather runoff in California. And the vision is to change the perception of stormwater as a contaminant source and view it as a valuable resource. We can use it to recharge our groundwater aquifers. We can reuse it for domestic purposes if we treat it. It supports natural watershed processes, and really it helps to beautify communities by creating habitat and open space. So if you are thinking about getting a stormwater grant, you can use that to be basically doing curb cuts so that the stormwater isn't running into your sewage system, and it's instead being naturally recharged into your aquifer, or it's creating green zones. And so you can be doing these in conjunction with street rehab projects. So you're doubling up. If you're doing infrastructure projects, you can also be using that stormwater grant money to help with the green infrastructure. So there's a lot of opportunities for dual benefit projects.
LGC did some analysis of Prop 1 when it was first passed and was tracking some of the funding opportunities that are available. So I'll make sure that that document is sent out to everyone that registered for this training. It's not a formal, publicly shared document. It was more for our internal purposes, but I'm happy to share that with everyone if they're interested.
We've gotten a couple questions about whether the slides will be available after the presentation, and they will be. So you'll be getting a link to that resource after the end of the presentation. Allison, any other questions coming in?
Yeah, you might be able to talk to this, Noshli. How can we use, or what about using GIS for checking compliance with my local WELO?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this is something that I'm not especially well versed in, but I am aware of a couple different programs in California and especially in the Southern Nevada Water District, where they're actually using GIS technology to ensure compliance with their rebate programs. So rather than using the manpower resources to go out and physically check compliance, they're able to do GIS compliance testing there. So this could also be used to check compliance with your local WELO, and that would save a lot of money. And speaking of saving money in terms of ensuring compliance with the program, Danielle spoke a little bit about interns and high school students and using them to go out and do these water audits. And this can be a really valuable program, especially if you're willing to put in, a couple staff days worth of training and really vetting out the interns, and whether college, high school aged. And they can be champions for water efficient landscapes and for this new norm that we're trying to move towards. So it's really worth considering and investing in, and there are a lot of resources available out there and pilot programs that other cities have implemented that show how successful it is to get these students involved in landscape water audits, and ultimately both the water savings and the money savings to the public utility.
Okay, another question kind of about community engagement that maybe you could answer, Noshli, or Danielle, because this kind of relates back to what we do here at LGC, but how do I talk to my electeds about the importance of water efficiency?
That's a terrific question, and that is LGC's area of expertise. It's where we have worked for over 35 years in engaging local elected officials on a wide range of policies and principles for smart growth and other sustainable development policies. So you can either become a member of the local government commission and receive the resources that we provide and a number of networking opportunities that we provide for local elected officials to come together and learn more about these topics, as well as technical assistance that we can provide to municipalities that are our partners and members. But I would encourage all of you to go to your city council or county supervisor meetings, get on the agenda and put together a presentation to share whatever your biggest concerns are or the importance of these different topics with your local elected officials.
Yeah.
Ashley, you want to add anything?
Just to build on that a little bit, and that we talked about how important it is to educate people about their water use and their water supply, where it comes from, their source water. And the same is true of elected officials. These elected officials are there to serve their constituents, so once they see that this is an issue that's going to affect the people of their community, they're much more inclined to get involved and educate themselves. So an organization like the Local Government Commission is there and available to help create water leaders out of your elected officials. And they really can be and should be the champions of water-wise long-term policy that supports resilience in your community. So getting the elected officials involved will help bring the funding to the programs, and it's one way to do that shift from our current to the new norm that we're trying to create.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm looking at a couple other questions. Ashley, could you maybe expand on what you mean by literature in the permitting office as a strategy for communicating compliance?
Yeah, so I'm sure you guys learned this yesterday, but MWELO is triggered by new construction or a retrofit of 2,500 square feet or more. So because most of those projects are going to go hand in hand with a larger project, the contractor is going to be in that permitting office. So most permitting offices have some sort of rotating roundhouse of information. So whether it's owner-builder guides and permitting checklists and site design guidelines and those types of documents, this is a really great place to be putting information about the MWELO or about water-efficient landscapes generally. Even plant lists, make it something that catches their eye with color and pictures, and something that while they're waiting their turn to get their permit or talk to the permitting plan reviewer, that they're going to want to grab and peruse. So this is a really valuable opportunity. It's an audience that's there, ready, and this is a great time to get in contact with them and to really connect with them on the model water efficient landscaper.
Perfect. Danielle, we have a question about stormwater best management practices. Somebody is wondering, how do we establish stormwater management best practices?
That's another very complex question, and something that's been the topic of full-day workshops in the past that LGC has offered and that we can offer again in the future. But as I touched on very briefly earlier in my presentation, the three core principles of stormwater management are slow it, spread it, and sink it. So you're trying to slow the flow of stormwater down to prevent flooding, to help those pollutants settle out, and then spreading it out over a large vegetated area to help reduce the pollutants, and then infiltrate into the groundwater table or into a collection basin that you can then use for treating and using as a water supply source. We do have a fact sheet that the LGC has produced on stormwater best practices, which we will include in the links that are sent out via email after the webinar. And we've recently updated our Ahwahnee Water Principles Guidebook to address the new changes in regulations to the MS4 permitting strategies. So that goes into a lot more detail on what stormwater best practices include. And also just want to direct you to the State Water Resources Control Board has recently adopted a stormwater strategic initiative and they are providing resources and trainings across the state on how to incorporate more green infrastructure into your stormwater management plans. Of course, it is a requirement now to include low impact development or green infrastructure. Again, that means using plant matter to manage your stormwater quality as well as for a water supply source. And as Noshli mentioned earlier, there's Prop 1 funding available to pay for investigating or even building projects to capture stormwater as a resource. And then there's one other resource Noshli just shared with me. The American Water Works Association has resources specific to stormwater best practices that are all compliant with the state regulations.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. We have some interest coming up in the QUEL trainings. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about how that QUEL training is structured?
Yeah, sure. Danielle mentioned it. It's a 20-hour class spread over 3 days. And that's the norm, depending on location and availability of trainers. We could spread it over, say, we've done it 3 separate Fridays, a Friday, a thought Friday, and then the third Friday would be the exam and the review session. So there is a lot of hands-on aspects to the QUEL course. We do a catch can test to determine how fast your landscape is how fast your irrigation system is putting water onto your landscape. We do a full landscape water audit, so we really emphasize critically looking at a landscape and determining where the inefficiencies are, and then looking at how to fix them. So we disassemble and assemble valves. We talk a lot about meters. We do a lot of water budgeting. So it's a very interactive course, but essentially the structure is 3 days, about 20 hours, including about a 2.5-hour review session and up to 2 hours to take the exam. And as a part of that, you are required to submit 2 CEUs within 12 months, every 12 months, so continuing education units. And the QUEL program accepts a variety of different education or CEUs that qualify for that.
What was the pass rate on our last QUEL class that we held?
Danielle's asking because she knows the answer. We had a 100% pass rate for our last QUEL course, which has never happened before. It was incredible. So we're really proud of all of the students who studied really hard and participated. But generally we have about an 80% pass rate, and we always do offer retest to the students if they're interested in pursuing that certification. It always looks good on a resume. I'm an EPA certified qualified landscape water water efficient landscaper. So it's really impressive. It was written originally for professional landscapers, but we have expanded the program to be relevant for municipal employees. So there is a lot in there about return on investment and how to sell water efficient landscapers to clients. But we've amended that to include a lot of land use planning decisions and compliance and those water audits that are more and more being conducted by municipal employees.
And do we think that we'll offer QUEL trainings in the North Sac Valley area?
There is not any currently planned, but we're hopeful to find some funding. So if there's interest, please let us know, and we will work even harder to make that happen for you guys.
And just to provide a little bit more detail on why that is, LGC received a grant from the Department of Water Resources through their Water Energy Grant Program, which is funded through the California Climate Investments Program, the greenhouse gas reduction funds I mentioned earlier. And that program is specifically funded for the Fresno area, which is why our QUEL trainings have been there to date. Because the QUEL training is so heavily subsidized, and that's a requirement of the US EPA program, it's a very costly program for us to provide. So we would be happy to provide the program in whoever's region would be interested in taking it, but we would have to find some alternative revenue or financing sources to cover the cost of bringing that training to you in order to keep the registration fee low. So if you're interested in that and have some ideas on folks that would be willing to assist with the costs of bringing a QUEL training to your area, please follow up with us. We'd love to talk to you about it.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Hopefully it's something can work out there. Well, I believe that is all of our questions. I guess one more thing you can follow up on, Danielle, is where they can maybe find more information on the Water Corps program.
Yes, and I'm going to type the website into the chat feature right now. It's our www.civicsparklgc.org. So if you go to the Civic Spark website, you can access the application for both Civic Spark and Water Corps, and there is another way to access the Water Corps page, which is watercorps.lgc.org. But you can apply to both programs through the Civic Spark webpage and access all the information for both programs there as well.
All right, thank you. So one more reminder to please fill out the survey we sent out to everyone. I'll also be including the survey link in a follow-up email. If you could take a few minutes to fill it out, this is the best way that we can improve our trainings and bring something even greater to you in the future. Also, there's an option within the survey for you to fill out if there's any interest for another training. You can say specifically what kind of training that your area is in need of, and we can pull the resources to provide that for you. So please do, if you find that there is a need or if you want to bring more trainings like this one back to your area, we would love to be up there again. I know I really enjoyed my trip to Marysville, so please make sure to fill it out completely. It really helps. For those of you who haven't submitted or didn't submit to me in person your ETP forms, I will be following up with you. Thank you very much for everyone who did send in your forms and who did sign in on the roster. But you will be hearing from me if you didn't sign those forms. I am more than happy to assist you in filling out those forms, especially with some of the trickier sections asking for random numbers that I didn't know existed until I had to work with these forms. So I can certainly help you, but I'll be asking for those again from you shortly.
And again, just to reiterate the importance of those forms, because the Local Government Commission is a nonprofit organization and most of our programs are grant funded, the reason we're able to bring programs like this to your community is because of that funding, and we won't get funded unless we turn in those completed forms. So please, please, please follow up with Allison and get all that paperwork completed. We know it's a pain and we really hate having to ask for it. It's just the negative side of trying to provide resources to the community at a low cost. So thank you again for your participation and support.
And thank you so much for attending and participating in this workshop all together. We had a great time this week, and I know I learned a lot from all of our speakers, and we look forward to more trainings where we can hopefully meet you guys again. Any words? All right, thank you very much, guys, and I hope you have a great weekend. We hope to speak to you again soon.